First News with Keeler in the morning on WIBX and WIBX950.com.
Let's see. I have some other interesting things here this morning. Did you know that Boonville was in a deal? I don't know why the state does this. I think they did it with the Utica School District at one point. They've done it. They came out and said that Boonville is in violation. The Boonville Police Department is in violation. That they have not provided their plan, their reform plan of the police department, which was required, I believe, in March of this year, right? And the state said they are now in violation. And then Boonville said, no, we're not. We have submitted our plan. No, you haven't. And we're going to publicly shame you, which is really what they did. Now the state has announced that Boonville has indeed submitted their plan.
Okay.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
How does this happen?
I don't know. Is this we filled out our plan, but we didn't check this one box, so it's technically incomplete?
I just think they were wrong, to be honest with you.
The state was wrong?
I think so. They are confirming that this is according to the Observer-Dispatch, confirming that Boonville has submitted its plan after initially listing them as one of the 9 agencies in the state that had yet to submit a police reform plan. New York State officials confirmed Wednesday evening that, yes, indeed, the Village of Boonville Police Department had, not just has, but had turned it in. Boonville originally was listed as the only police agency in Oneida County that had not submitted their reform plan. The police officer in charge, Fred Rubensky, said Thursday morning, we knew we had turned it in, but just still being on that list was a big threat regarding the funding. Yes, there was confidence we were in compliance, but not being on the list just raised a lot of concerns. Not being on the list of those who were compliant. He said we were on track to have everything in effect very, very shortly. I don't know. If anybody else gets their information wrong and then goes public with it, in some cases they can be sued over that, right?
Yeah, you're right.
But if you're New York State or if you're the government, apparently that's just okay. But we made a mistake. We didn't get it right. Sorry it caused any problems. It didn't get it right. But imagine if the foot was on the other shoe, right? How bad that would be. Okay, we have news this morning. We've been going through this over the last couple of years. This Dave Gordon story. And in February of last year, the judge ruled that Dave Gordon's lawsuit against Town Square, against me, against others, was thrown out, and that anything that we had reported. See, the thing is, in the world of news and journalism, if you are reporting on something that is true and can be proven. That's why it's so important when you source something. If police tell us A, B, and C happened, and we say A, B, and C happened, we're liable. But if we say police tell us A, B, and C happened, we're not liable if A, B, and C didn't really happen. Mm-hmm. We were told that. So you got to be careful living in a world of absolutes. We know what was absolute. The police did tell us that A, B, and C happened. So in the case of this, there was that arrest report and all that stuff that happened during that domestic case that went back a couple of years that had surfaced. And the fact that it had surfaced, and keep in mind, until it was buried after a year, that was public. It was public knowledge. The arrest was public knowledge. What happened after that is completely different situation, because I think later on it was buried in court. Nonetheless, we were sued over it, which is never easy because you have to defend yourself, and that's never easy. It's never inexpensive. But the judge threw out our
Unless
case.
you're Governor Cuomo.
You're right, and he has the executive.
Taxpayers do.
We pay for that. So Monaski, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but in February, the Judge Del Conte ruled that we were off the hook. There was no appeal by Gordon. He did not appeal the case. But the person, and we're specifically not mentioning her name because she was falsely accused. In fact, it was completely debunked by the court. There was zero evidence. If you remember, he kept saying, I will produce the evidence to show that it's true. Did he ever produce any evidence?
No.
Not an ounce of it, because there was none. And there were some things that happened because we were a part of this lawsuit that I had knowledge, we all had knowledge of, that I don't want to get into that either. But it was completely proven that the accusation about this female was wrong. Completely disproven.
Well, and the issue was he never brought any evidence to prove it.
Correct. But beyond that, the other side brought evidence and proved that it wasn't true.
Gotcha.
They proved their case. So the case was thrown out. And from what we understand, there was an offer made, and that was that if you come clean and publicly address this, everything will go away. And there was a refusal there. Therefore, the person who was accused, she did what are you going to do? You gotta. I don't want to keep this thing going. This is me talking. I would say I don't want to keep this thing going, but I'm going to sue for damages.
Right.
I mean, I've given you an opportunity. I'm going to sue for damages. So that has occurred, and that I don't know if that would be called a trial or a hearing, but it goes in front of a jury. A jury will determine what the number is, the financial number in terms of damages. I also have to say I'm very disgusted by the way local media covered this story. I'm especially when someone's in a position where we were told we couldn't comment on it. I couldn't comment. We as a company could not comment on it. It's not like we're trying to be evasive. It is we work for a corporation that said, let's not play this out in the media. So I felt like I felt like the coverage of this was very poor, especially when in our case, it's about a freedom of press issue. One would think that members of the press would at least look at this from that standpoint, but apparently not. So I'm disappointed in that. It is what it is. I'm sure I've said the things down the road previously that have made, boy, now he's in the news. We got him. God forbid. Anyway, so wrapping this whole thing up, we received subpoenas recently, which we couldn't talk about. We were delivered a subpoena to testify in this damages, well, let's call it a trial or hearing. What is my testimony going to, how in the world is that going to help in a damages case against him? I didn't understand that. But the part that it started to click for me is we were being asked to produce evidence as if the trial didn't end, as if we didn't win the trial back in February of last year. Not this year, last year. It's been over that long. So we're going to relitigate this whole thing, and we're going to force us, the company, and me to spend legal fees. And therefore, I would have next week had to have appeared in court while I would sit on the stand. And I believe in this case, Dave Gordon was serving, and I don't know for a fact, but I'm pretty sure based on what I've seen, he was representing himself. So he would have had me on the stand and could have just questioned away. I mean, I don't know what he'd be looking for, how that would affect what the jury would rule on damages for him. I don't know how that would play any role. So anyway, the decision came down yesterday, and we won. And it seems like this saga is over with. After the state Supreme Court Judge Scott Del Conte deemed Gordon's charges of indiscretion by his opponent during a political campaign unfounded and false, charges against me, against WIBX, Town Square of slander and defamation, unfounded and false. Gordon was sued by the former female county staff member who was specifically named in the accusation. The court awarded the former staff member summary judgment on liability in 2020 of last year in regards to defamatory comments Gordon made about her. As a result, a jury is scheduled to hear arguments to determine damages at the proceeding to begin on the 7th. Now, the judge said Gordon fails to submit the clear and specific evidence demonstrating that the subpoena material is highly material and relevant, critical to his defense, and not obtainable from any alternative source. necessary to overcome this privilege. Accordingly, the motion to quash must be granted. That is, to quash the subpoena that I was getting. Any testimony from Keeler would be utterly irrelevant to any proper inquiry on the issue of the damages suffered by McCann, the only remaining issue to be tried by the jury here. Therefore, our part of this has been thrown out. So should this be the... and by the way, the last part of it I think is interesting, too. Judge Del Conte reserved his decision on sanctions until the completion of the damages hearing on June 7th. Under that New York State statute, awards of costs and imposition of financial sanctions for frivolous conduct in civil litigation could be considered. In other words, he is holding back on judgment whether or not the subpoena and the fact that we had to fight it and spend legal fees, he's holding back his decision on whether or not Gordon would be possibly responsible for something like, let's say, legal fees. So does this end all of this?
You as far as our involvement,
I believe it does.
It's got to be, right?
Yeah, I don't think you can appeal. I mean, I don't know what he can appeal, but
I hate to say it this way, but at what point do we start looking at filing for harassment?
Yeah, because it's exactly what it. Do you know there was one part in here where he was asking for I forgot what the subpoena read, but he was asking for basically hundreds of hours of audio to be submitted to him. Mm-hmm. Everything that I had in my possession, everything there was at the radio station, any communications, it would work out to be hundreds of hours of broadcasts and air check tapes and then how long would that take to be able to provide that? We'd have to weed through everything, and it just was. It was for a case where we have no involvement whatsoever.
Yeah, it's laughable. How does that pertain to the defense of? I just don't. Okay.
Jeff, I just want to be careful. I don't want to be. I don't want to get into a situation where we're opening the door for another lawsuit. But I know you want to comment. And
I understand.
Jeff,
my question is more to you. Like, what did you just do to us? You literally just sat there and said, well, the Dave Gordon saga is over. Have you not watched a single horror film since the 80s?
I see.
It's just reliving the Friday the 13th.
You're right. We're reliving it all over again.
I work at the election stations. Next time I see a ballot, his name's going to be all over it. Dog catcher.
No. He doesn't.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't live here anymore. I don't think so. I think he's. But I understand. Listen. My apologies, but I think we've not been able to talk about any of this. This has all been going on behind the scenes, and we've had to stay out of it.
And of course, I am not. You like you mentioned before. If someone says to you, "Hey, this person said this," well, of course, that person years and years ago said that illustrious line of, "When you represent yourself in court, you have."
Yeah, and I don't even know what's going on there, and I don't know that for a fact. I'm not a part of this. I'm not a part of this hearing. All I know is that, based on evidence, there's a young woman who has been dragged through the mud for no reason, and that's what we had talked about from the very, very beginning of this story. And not to mention when the press conference, you covered the initial press conference, where not only did he say there was indiscretion going on at the county, but he had said that I had like rogue children out there and was cheating on my wife, and that was
as you were under the knife for your
at
cancer
that
surgery.
Very moment I was under Michael Jackson drugs, and they were cutting open my colon and cutting part of it out.
Call I had to tell your wife. Hey,
that was going on at the my wife was in the waiting room, and Andrew called and told her, "What were you thinking?" Andrew.
I mean, to be fair, though,
that was my fault.
Well, did she want to hear it from me?
You're
or
right.
The news?
It was a good distraction because I had complications while I was in surgery. I had complications with my kidneys, and it went on twice as long as it was supposed to. So I guess you were a good distraction. So
I mean, to be fair, that the subject of, let's call them illegitimate children, does bear some credibility when people keep asking me, why does he keep Andrew on the job?
On that moment, in that note, I'm hanging up on you,
Oh,
Jeff.
thank
you.
you.
Have a good one, guys.
All right. Drop the mic. Go ahead. Drop it. Okay. There he goes.
By the way,
Drop the line.
that line he was referring to is a lawyer who represents himself in court is a fool for a client.
Yeah. And listen, I don't mean to say this, but I do enjoy a good argument from time to time. Mm-hmm. So but in court, it's never that way. And I've been a witness in court more than once. And you think you're going in there and you're going to set everybody straight.
Oh,
you're
yeah.
but then you
Tell 'em
realize
how it is.
Then you realize you can only answer the question that is asked of you, and if they cut you off, they cut you off, and then the judge cuts you off. You only basically get to say what they are going to let you say. Mm-hmm. So it's never all that much fun. But I'm glad it's over. And, I just feel terrible, which is why I know everybody knows the name, and I get it, but we're not using the name, and to me it's symbolic because this person did nothing to deserve this, except took a job and was in some case related to a nasty political story. But she had nothing to do with it. And why she had to be dragged through the mud is just so disgusting to me. So therefore, we don't mention the name. Julie says, it's not re-litigation. It's a hearing for damages or testimony on financial loss so they can tell him what he owes. You could have lost advertisers and revenues because of his slander. So, and that I got to tell you something. If anybody could have gone back, and we also could have countersued and said this slander about us, about our lack of journalistic integrity, hurt and damaged us, we could have sued, but it's just not worth it for
your
her.
Claims
though,
of infidelity and
that
children?
as well.
Yeah,
but it's laughable. So it's not even worth. But I think that what she went through, the real victim here is the former staff member, and to me, that's a shame.
I actually think it goes beyond that. It goes to the county executive
no
and his
doubt about
family
it.
as well.
There's another victim. His family had to endure all of that. And the other part of this is when people start throwing out things like this is probably a bad comparison. Well, then maybe you shouldn't use it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm talking to myself. This is
You're
probably
reading my mind.
This is probably a bad comparison, but you see this happen in family court a lot when a really ugly family court, and all of a sudden the mother, and let's just say it's the mother, accuses the father of molestation. He's a child molester, an abuser. Once that gets out there, you can't put that back in the box. You can disprove it, but it's always going to be out there in the back of someone's mind. Mm-hmm. And that you can never get back. You'll never get that back, no matter what. And that's the big shame of this whole thing.
Yeah, somebody famously said at the end of a trial, I guess basically where it was proven that the horrible allegations against them weren't true, they allegedly said, I'm throwing allegedly in, they said, okay, great, now where do I go to get my reputation back? Who was that?
Exactly right.
I don't remember who that was.
And the other part of this is, remember, in courts, if I'm correct, they're proving it's the fact that they didn't prove their case, not that they proved that the person was innocent. You're never innocent, you're not guilty, right? They didn't prove that you were guilty, therefore you're not guilty. The courts don't say you're innocent, and that leaves that lingering out there, and it's a big, big shame. But anyway, this whole thing is, at least for us, we believe it is officially over. But man, what I got to tell you just one thing, and I said this. Do you remember when Dave Gordon was running against Tony Pacini? And that race was going on, and let's erase all of this stuff from it. But then it was what, a year later? How long was it that before COVID hit? Can you imagine had Dave Gordon won? It would be Dave Gordon doing those briefings every day, and not Tony Pacini. Could you imagine that? Wow. It shows you that the elections really do have consequences. So you got to think about who you're voting for and All of that. Crazy stuff. Okay, well, listen, we have a lot to get to coming on. Christians Fund is holding a big event coming up, and there's a football camp for young athletes, and it allows people to actually, in person, to get together. Dr. Ken Hall, I want to focus this morning all on the fact that people who aren't vaccinated, the rate of positivity is climbing in those people with the variants versus those who are vaccinated. And the free money question next hour.